Introduce Delegate. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Delegate Lorig Charkoudian, District 20 delegate. She has a PhD in economics from Johns Hopkins University. Lorig has been a member of the House of Delegates since January 2019. Her legislative priorities include food security, environmental and climate justice, and criminal justice reform. She's a member of the Maryland Legislature Transit Caucus and has been on the front lines of the fight to improve the somewhat deplorable state of pedestrian safety on our state roads, and has been a vigorous advocate in that effort. And with that, I will welcome Delegate Charkoudian. She will give us a preview and things to look forward to in the upcoming Maryland legislative session.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here. I am, well, I want to start by just thanking everyone on this call and your extraordinary activism and advocacy. And there's so much amazing work that this organization has done. And so I want to start by thanking you sort of broadly, because it's really important work that you've done on so many issues. I'm not going to go through all of them because I think you know what you've done. But I also specifically want to thank you as I get ready to go into this this PowerPoint that I'm going to walk through in terms of the legislation that I'm bringing this year. I want to thank you, and several of you have been in an ongoing conversation with me about State Highway Administration roads and just the frustration of actually getting things accomplished with the State Highway Administration. So thanks to all of you who have been in conversations with me. We've had these conversations both in doing safety walks in your neighborhoods, or you know, where there's been issues. So Paul, we did one recently. Eileen, we did one in your neighborhood. David, it seems, has a honing device whenever State Highway Administration is going to be in the county. He seems to be able to find that conversation. Christy, I shouldn't start naming names because there's lots of you who have been part of this, but I'm really grateful for your work. And then of course, the really important work that you've done to bring attention to and honor to the precious lives that we've lost in our community, pedestrians and bikers. And that's been really important. And it's been important to continue to bring that front and center to the community, but also to the State Highway Administration, and ask them to be more directly accountable to the lives lost. And that, of course, is the most extreme end of sort of the traffic violence. There's, of course, all the other pieces, and I'm preaching to the choir now, but I try to keep reminding them as well. It's not just the lives lost or even the lives disrupted. It's by a physical crash, but it's all the lives disrupted and things that don't happen because people are afraid to walk, can't send their children, and so on. So there are ongoing conversations that we all have been having, and you all have been part of the conversations with me. I know that many of you who aren't in my district are having these same conversations with your legislators in your districts. And so after about 3 years of standing on street corners, walking up and down corridors, standing at intersections, begging, and I honestly I definitely talk to State Highway Administration more than any other state agency, and I talk to a lot of state agencies. I probably have, but my office probably communicates with the State Highway Administration 4 times a week. So either me directly or my staff members following up with them, raising issues, and so on. So, so after all of that, and I think many of you have been in these spaces with us where we've heard the State Highway Administration commit to doing something, and then a year goes by, 2 years go by, 3 years go by, 4 years go by, we're told it's still on the list. And that's sort of on the positive end of things, right? There's lots of times they come out, they look at our request and they say no. So that's one aspect of it that has to get addressed. But the aspect that I'm mostly focused on, or partially focused on, I would say, in this legislation, is really trying to get at all of the times that they come out and say yes, and then we wait 5 years, and in the meantime, people die, people are hurt, people are affected, people avoid the area, even after there's been approval by the State Highway Administration to fix something. Yeah, the list. So, so I'm going to walk through this legislation and what it's trying to get at. It's a very long preview. But before I do that, I do need to say, when I start talking about this, there's so much that's wrong with MDOT and the State Highway Administration that I think you start to look at this legislation and you'll probably think of 100 things that aren't in there, and you're welcome to raise them. I probably agree with you. But any one piece of legislation is only sort of trying to get at this is actually a pretty comprehensive piece of legislation. It's going to be a challenge to pass. I'll talk a little bit about strategy when we finish, but I just would kind of recognize that there's a lot legislatively that is here, and then there's a lot that's not here, and so we need to keep doing that work as well. So I'm going to try to share my screen. This worked a minute ago. Hang on. Sorry, bear with me. I'm learning these things. Okay, here we go. I think hopefully you're looking at a shared screen. Now it looks like a slideshow, not like my summer vacation photos. All right.
Good, looks good.
Okay, so that's the welcome site. Okay, so here's the sort of four parts that we're trying to accomplish with this bill. And I'm going to walk through each of them, but just broadly, the first is to require a comprehensive overview. It's probably a multi-year process requiring the State Highway Administration to look at high injury corridors, as well as corridors that maybe aren't high injury, but are very dangerous to vulnerable users. And this gets to this point about vulnerable users aren't using them because they're so dangerous. And so they could never get fixed if we only look at injuries. So that's one piece of it. The second piece of it is just to force an increase in spending in pedestrian and bike safety areas. The next piece of it is to really rethink sorry, the way my Zoom is, I can't actually see this, rethink the improvement, the process that is used, and add a safety consideration, require a safety consideration in all improvement projects. So, and then number 4 is looking at interim safety enhancements. So 3 and 4 are really interesting to me because there's a lot of bills that I pass, not just in pedestrian safety area, but in other areas as well, where it's like, wait, we have to tell people to do that, or like, wait, that was legal already. That was legal. Wait, that's not what we're already doing. Do we really have to say that? And in my mind, these two sort of fit in that category. And I have had many conversations now with State Highway Administration. Since I've started this particular bill, I've had many conversations with the State Highway Administration policy people talking about this and saying, like, can you send me, like, where's the decision matrix? How are your engineers supposed to be making these decisions? Where in that decision matrix does this question come up? And it doesn't seem to exist. And so we legislatively can just sort of force it to exist. So, and I can't really see everybody. I am perfectly fine with folks jumping in actually while I'm going through this. You don't need to wait till the end. We will have time at the end, but if you just want to unmute yourself and say, can I ask a question? Feel free to do that. I can't see your faces while I'm going through the slides, but you can start talking and I'll stop for a sec. So so the first phase of this is just this. So I think you all probably know that right now one of the really disturbing pieces of the state's process is that when there is a fatality, there is some kind of internal analysis, but there is not, it's not public. So the internal analysis that looks at what happened and what needs to be done about it apparently occurs. It's not public. So there's actually a separate bill. Delegate Carr is bringing a bill that will require that those be made public going forward. So what this portion of the bill does is 2 things. One is it requires a look back at fatalities and significant injuries, and it requires looking at those analyses and incorporating them into this public document. And then it also, as I was saying, looking at corridors for fatalities for sure, but also for just generally looking at vulnerable user safety, wanting to make sure we don't miss the places in the state where something's so dangerous that you have entire corridors that just don't get used because by pedestrians and bikers because of the danger. So it's that comprehensive look, and then it is a plan for fixing it, and then a budget and a timeline. And so if you look at this, it probably looks very familiar to sort of the first step in the Transit Investment and Safety Act that we passed and then overrode, which is look at what it takes to make your streets safe for pedestrians. Like, look at that whole plan. What would it take? Let's put a budget down. Let's put a timeline down. And then that gives us something to hold the State Highway Administration accountable to, working towards that plan, and or puts us in a position to then be able to pass legislation in future years that builds on that plan. And it's, you know, if folks were watching the debate, both on the Transit Safety Investment Act initially or the veto override we just did, you know, it was their numbers, it was their analysis. And so, you know, it was a sort of an obvious next step to say, well, if that's what it takes, then we're going to sort of put that money there. So that's phase one. That's part one of the bill. The second part of the bill, I'll talk a little bit about where this came from and some of the thought process on this, because I've had some folks ask me questions about this. So this is, if you're familiar, and I know some of you are, I know who I'm talking to, and you're very familiar with this, with the road shows and the CTP. And so if you look at it, what you see in the way that CTP is designed is you have mostly, and most of our attention tends to go towards the major projects. And the major projects are sort of anything that requires, the distinction tends to be sort of something that requires a NEPA. It's like a much sort of more substantial renovation of an area. And then there's another section in the State Highway Administration's budget that's under the what do you call it, the maintenance, sort of the maintenance areas. And this is where, you know, I've had these conversations with Administrator Smith, and I've said, okay, here's the list of the 27 things in District 20 that we're waiting on, right? Where would the money for that come from? And he has pointed me to these four line item areas. And so what I'm doing in the bill is requiring the doubling. It's actually 2.5 times of most of them, is what I've done in the first year, and then an increase in 10% for the next 5 years after that. And what's important about this is that we've had some conversations, and I've looked at a lot of information that some of members have sent me, where it appears that the state has gotten money that should have gone to sort of a pedestrian safety federal money, and it looks like it's gotten used for something else. And there's questions about, well, transportation trust fund, and that gets used for roads, but not for pedestrian safety. And the way that I've actually written the legislation is I'm not trying to micromanage, because it's too easy in saying like, oh, you have to spend all of this money in this way and that money in that way. And I've decided not to try to do that, and instead to say, I don't actually care where you get the money from. This is what you have to spend on these areas, is the minimum what you have to spend on these areas. And it sort of lets me get out of some of where I think it can get very slippery in terms of like, well, we did get that and it was part of this, and so it got spent in this way, and then it's just very hard to hold that accountable. So that's what's happening in this one. Is there so I was trying to see if someone was asking.
Yeah, I was asking. So the proposed spending that you show there is your legislative proposal, as opposed to what is in the, I guess, the current budget.
Yeah. So this, the light blue.
If you go back one.
if I go back one. Wait, sorry, wait, that's not what I want to do. This
There
one,
we go. Yeah, no, that was 2.
this one here.
Yeah.
You're
So
looking at-
the proposed SHA budget is what you are suggesting in the legislation.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
Good.
that's my proposed budget, not their proposed budget. Right.
Cool. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I had someone, yes, thank you for that clarification. There was a question in the chat about turning radius. Jonathan, I'm not sure I actually understand. Are you saying like, would these budget areas include turning radius, or were you asking if this includes if this analysis includes turning radius?
It's the analysis, Lorig, because the big problem is fast turns account for many crashes and damage. And we now know why turns are fast off main roads, and we know how to fix it. And I think it's really important that that be part of the analysis.
Yeah, I mean, it's my sense that it would be. The language is more precise than what's here, but it doesn't actually go into listing every single thing to look at. But I think that it does tie back to it. It names specifically the a couple of well, it's my sense that it would be. I'll double check and make sure that the way it's written, it would include that. Okay, so moving on to part 3 of this. Is everyone looking at something that says number 3? Sorry, I get nervous. Okay, so sometimes I've been on here, sometimes I'm looking at one screen, everyone else is looking at something else. So this falls under the category of wait, that's not happening already. And I actually picked, this is my favorite, or a little further north of here is one of my favorite stories. No, this is the intersection right here. So I'll give this as an example. I think folks are probably familiar with it, but there's a number of places where, you know, in theory, the state has adopted this context-driven design as the way that they're moving forward. But whenever they do sort of regular improvement projects, whenever they do resurfacing or anything along those lines, they just tend to resurface in the exact same way as the road condition was before. And so you have these opportunities because you're there, you're digging up, you're putting down new asphalt, you're doing whatever you're doing, and it's an opportunity to make lanes more narrow. It's an opportunity to change speed limits, an opportunity to add crosswalks. But that's not part of the process. And when I've asked about this, and I think Veers Mill in a section that's not in my district, this happened where Veers Mill was repaved. Context-driven design would suggest that you would have made I think it was Veers Mill, you would have made the lanes more narrow, but they didn't, right? Similarly, in this intersection here, actually what happened was, this is 29 and Oakleaf. And so if you know this area, there's a slip lane, you actually can't see it right here because the map is covering. So there's a slip lane and there's a bus stop on the east side. I think there's a bus stop on the west side. There's all the apartments. There's the you know, the condos over on the west side. And so people are crossing here all the time, and they're crossing in this, and they're coming on to this this median here. So they had the repaving, they had the money, they did the repaving of Route 29. I've been asking for a crosswalk, signalized crosswalk, a hot crosswalk here for about 2 years now. That was not done, but what was done, if folks recall briefly, there was fencing up on the median. The fencing was put up on the median to discourage pedestrians from crossing, right? So now you went from pedestrians on the median waiting to run across the 3 lanes of traffic to pedestrians standing in the slip lane, waiting to run across 3 lanes of traffic. I'll grab you, I see you, Christy, I'm gonna grab that in a second. And so when so they had told me initially, there's no money, we can't do the crosswalk with the resurfacing because the money is federal money, it's not state money, and we can't use it for that. But then suddenly there's fencing up. And so I followed up with Administrator Smith, and I was like, how is it that you can use state money to make things harder for pedestrians, but you can't, I mean, federal money to make things harder for pedestrians, but that money is not flexible enough to actually make it safer. And to be fair to him, he was actually kind of, well, he agreed with me. And so the fencing came down, and it's back in this queue to get the crosswalk put in. But the idea is, so that's, I'm giving these as examples. I think you probably are familiar and could probably name others. But the idea is that every time resurfacing is being done, every time other improvements are being done, there's a requirement that engineers look at it from the perspective of also what would context-driven design or what would the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration countermeasures database say would make things safer here, and can we put that in at the same time? Now, sometimes it's true that there isn't money for it. It's a significant increase in the cost, and so they can't do it. But we found examples of where it could be done at the exact same time at the same cost, and isn't just because it's not part of the standard process. And so that's what this would require. Christy, you had a question.
Yeah, so my question is around the reference to the NHTSA countermeasures and the requirement that SHA use them. So the NHTSA countermeasures, in their most recent version of their countermeasures Bible or whatever, which came out in July, the countermeasures are actually like ranked on effectiveness using a star system, like 3 stars through 5 stars. And I didn't know if there's a risk that SHA could come back and say, okay, well, this countermeasure is only ranked in its effectiveness at a 3-star level, so we shouldn't have to use it, or like something of that sort. So I guess I would just take a closer look at like how they structure those countermeasures and their guidance, and make sure that there's no way for SHA to kind of weasel out of it. So that's just one question.
Christy, some states have triaged there are many countermeasures, as you know, right? I mean, with all kinds of stars. Then there's the proven countermeasures. And some states, actually like Virginia, they'll say, okay, here are our top tier countermeasures. Engineers, consider these whenever you have a safety project. So, you know, I'm not aware that Maryland's done anything like that.
I'm not talking about the state of Maryland. We're talking, she's pointing to the NHTSA countermeasures.
Right.
And there is a huge, thick, 3-inch thick book that NHTSA puts out that's called Countermeasures That Work.
Yeah, that's what I referred to. And most, because there's so many, you got to triage them. What Virginia has done is that here's the top tier, use these. I mean, you know.
Okay,
anyway.
that's fine. But if we're pointing to the NHTSA countermeasures, like we should just make sure it's really clear.
Are
I
you
don't want to
worried?
get stuck on this point, but
No, I'm trying to figure out if you're worried that they would take a lower starred version, or that they would do nothing instead of doing something that was a lower starred version. I'm not sure which is it the second?
I think either, but really what I'm thinking of is more the second, right? They're like, well, you know, there's no countermeasure in this instance that's ranked as 5 stars based on NHTSA's body of work. So I just think that there's a risk there that they could say that.
I think that's right. And I think you know, to David's point, I mean, the difference, I don't think that Virginia has it in statute. I think they just have they sort of implement it effectively in their regs. And so there's an element of whenever we're writing statute, again, you know, as far as I'm concerned, we shouldn't have to micromanage this in statute. Like, we shouldn't have to say it at all. We start to say it in statute, it hopefully directs a regulatory process that gets it right. But we should stay on top of it, right? So all of you, I mean, the way this works, it's very much teamwork. You know, like, I have found these issues partially because of all of your sort of local advocacy around intersections and corridors. And so I think if we find that that's what is happening with this, we can micromanage more in state statute. You know, it's generally frowned upon, but I think that we should be paying attention to if that's what sort of starts to happen. And I think that we can go back and be more direct.
I mean, I think it's just like being careful of the reference, because the other point that I would make is that, you point to NHTSA here, there's also Federal Highway Administration's proven safety countermeasures. And, I'm sure they align pretty closely with what NHTSA says, but maybe not always. So should just be like careful of what we're referring to and just make sure that's the right thing to be referring to.
Okay.
Yeah.
If there is another set of countermeasures, I can add them. I mean, there's context-driven design. We're trying to just sort of list a number of things.
Streamline. Right.
Yeah. So, but if there's another thing that you think should be listed in there, I can add that. Since I've stopped for a second, I'm just taking a quick look at the chat. University Boulevard. Yeah, I think, David, those are all examples, if folks have the chat open in front of them, of, places where there's a resurfacing being done. It's an opportunity to narrow lanes. Their own context-driven design elements would suggest that lanes ought to be narrowed, and that does not happen. Oak Leaf, County Road Code. Oh, yeah. So right, makes it similar. Thank you, Jonathan, to the county code. Yeah, so slip lanes in general, I would say, similar to the turning radius that Jonathan was talking about, would be part of that initial analysis. Yeah, so Paul, your question is about changing the culture. I think, part of what I have heard from the State Highway Administration in my conversations about this is that there is a change in culture that's happening. And I would say that's probably true. It's a very large agency. I would say leadership now at the top and in the state and in the SHA, more so than maybe 8 years ago, is definitely more committed to and engaged around conversations of safety for all users. But that it's like the turning of the Titanic. It's just not moving fast enough. That culture change is not fast enough to save lives and to make our streets workable for everybody. And so I embrace that, and I am willing to work with the State Highway Administration to the extent that they are interested in engaging around that culture change. But there's gotta, part of what this bill is trying to do is to push the envelope, just to push the pace at which that's happening by forcing some very specific changes to kind of the checklist of how things get done, and to push the envelope on the pace at which things are happening. So I do believe when State Highway comes out and says, yeah, we're gonna, put a hawk signal in here, I think that they mean that. I think it's on a list somewhere. It's just that the funding is so woefully inadequate that it could be on that list for a very, very long time. And so that's where, it may be a change in the culture that now that's been identified, and that's good. But if we don't have the funding behind it, then it doesn't get us where we need to go in terms of safety on our roads. Jonathan.
One thing I wondered, Lorig, is if you're ever able to
Did he freeze or did I freeze?
I think it's him. Jonathan, are you frozen? Did your audio drop? Maybe you can post in chat.
Okay, well, I'll move on to the next slide, and then we'll have more time for questions. So we'll catch that in a second. See if I can move this down. Okay. Okay, so this is, she did a good job. I had someone else do my slides. That's why I'm sitting here surprised by some of them. So all right, so this is the final component that in my mind also falls under this idea of like, wait, that was legal, or wait, that we weren't already doing that. And this is the issue of interim safety enhancements. So right now, as we've talked a lot about this queue, that none of us can quite get our hands on. We know that there are corridors, intersections, areas where there is a plan in place to do a safety improvement. Again, sort of spot safety improvement, not, the protected bike lane all the way along University. But so there's a plan in place to fix it. And then it is 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And, many of you were there on Carrollyn University, which is on the list, by the way. And someone was killed while we were waiting for that intersection to be fixed. So, so the idea behind this one is that when an intersection or corridor or safety plan, a safety improvement gets on their list, gets approved, and is expected to take more than 12 months, the district team, the engineers, have to look for and implement any immediate safety improvements that can be made. And implement them. And so this example here this is Piney Branch and Ritchie. So this is an area that we walked in April of 2019 with the State Highway Administration team, the District 3 team. And we identified, and actually sort of just south of this side here, this intersection, you can't actually see it here, closer to the middle school. A student was killed a number of years ago on the street. But so this intersection was identified as a place they're going to put in a fully signalized 4-way signal crossings and everything else. So that's great. We're celebrating in July of 2019 when we were told that. And then July, August, September, and then a year goes by, and then another year goes by, and nothing's happening. And so we have this conversation, like, what can be done in the interim? And they're like, oh, we can make it a 4-way stop in the interim. And we're like, oh, that's a good idea. Like, why didn't we talk about that before? Like, if we knew it was going to take some time, like, why didn't you say, but in the interim we could do a 4-way stop? Like, why do we have to wait 2 years and then ask that question? So we got the 4-way stop, which again is not the perfect solution. I do think we need the fully signalized intersection there. And we're told that that's still on the list somewhere. But what it brought up for me, and I've now had these conversations in several other areas. Stewart Lane is another area where, that's been theoretically going to get fixed for 10 years. I'm told it's sometime in the next 4 years. And I continue to say, like, but what are the things you can do in the interim that make it safer for pedestrians, even before you fix the entire nightmare of, like, all the redesigning that has to happen and the utilities and everything else. So they've come up with some really minor things, but they're still looking at that question on Stewart about the possibility of some interim fixes. So the idea behind this is, again, adding to the way that an assessment of an area is done after a decision is made about what the appropriate treatment is, figuring out how long that's realistically likely to take, and looking at interim improvements that can be implemented immediately. So again, this is one of those things that I would have thought would be a standard piece of the process. But I have now had lots of interactions where if I don't raise it myself, it's not a part of the process. And so, so we put it into law. Okay. And that's my contact information. I think folks know how to get me. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can see your beautiful faces, or at least your beautiful names. And let's see, is Jonathan, are you back yet? I'm wondering if we can hear your question now, and then I'll take other questions.
Can everyone hear me now?
We can, yeah.
Okay, all I was wondering, this was out of a meeting about the university pilot bike lanes that I attended a while back. That was pretty interesting in terms of interpersonal dynamics between Slater, who's now the transportation secretary, and the fellow whose name I'm repressing, who is actually now the head of SHA. And the head of SHA guy very much thought there were people who didn't like the pilot bike lanes. And it was Slater who said, oh no, we saw a lot of comments from the people who liked them. So I guess my question only is there an opportunity to leverage the transportation secretary, who I think whose head is more in this, when you need to make more progress with SHA?
So I think part of the issue is that on larger projects, like putting in new bike lanes, or the Montgomery Hills is another area where we've been doing a lot of advocacy for a while, or other sort of larger projects like that. I am likely, and you all were likely to be in conversations with both the secretary and the administrator. And so in those contexts, even though they require other maneuvering, in the case of Montgomery Hills, like several $1 million, we are able to harness their interest in sort of the complete streets ideas. What this bill is primarily focused on are the decisions that get made at the district level. So it's the District 3 team. So it's like Derek Gunn and Joe Mogis and Erica, and you'll probably know them from some of the sort of smaller meetings that we have on a particular corridor. And that's where you have a lot of engineers who are making decisions according to whatever the process has been for, whatever the process has been, right? And so there are this change in culture that's happening in those spaces. But I generally, I have to say, I generally try not to call the secretary about every intersection in District 20, but I've been close on some of them. I have called him about some of them. But he can't realistically, the secretary nor the administrator cannot realistically be involved every time there's a corridor that needs a speed limit slowed down, or a section that needs to have lanes made more narrow. And so I think you're right. And I'm definitely engaging them with this legislation and trying to offer them the opportunity to really show the leadership and commitment for Vision Zero by supporting the concepts in this legislation. But the goal of the legislation is to not have to engage with them on all the specifics in our communities. I think I saw somebody else was raising their hand. I'm not sure. Was that you, Nick? No, I thought I saw someone else trying to get in. Okay, are there other questions that I haven't had a chance to answer?
Delegate Charkoudian, on your point 4 with the quick fix. I see this over on the Prince George's side from District 3. There'll be a complaint, and they'll kind of put window dressing out there. They'll put a little paint. In some cases, they change the crosswalk from diagonal to parallel, and that was a fix. It just seems like, what can we do to brush off the politicians with a little paint and a little signage? That I see that the intent of the interim safety is it's good. It's just like, we go back to our countermeasures. The interim fixes need to be effective. They need to make a tangible effect, and not just window dressing. So hopefully that'll have a little bit more teeth than do something, do anything.
Yeah, well, I'll give you the 2 examples of the interim fixes that I still believe are very interim, but they do make a difference. And one is the 4-way stop sign at Ritchie and Piney Branch, which I have to say the vehicles are not really necessarily that happy with, but the pedestrians are way happier and safer with. And the second is, and so I would say that's not window dressing. I would say I'm still advocating for the 4-way, either for the full signal there, but that's not window dressing. And the other is, interestingly enough, on Stewart Lane, they have not put in anything that acknowledges that people cross there, right? You've seen me engage them on that issue, but they have extended the light by 10 seconds, which is a sort of quiet recognition that people cross there and they need more time to get across. So that actually it does give people more time to get across. It's not the long-term solution we need, but it isn't also just paint. So, and I know there's others, there's other examples, but the second thing that I think is important is There's a comment about the interim fix on Dale Drive. The second thing that there's two things that I think are important to think about in terms of this bill. Well, so the second thing that I have actually put into the legislation is that the bigger solution, like the long-term solution, cannot lose its queue in the line that it was in because there's an interim fix. So if they have agreed that there's going to be a four-way intersection at Piney Branch and Ritchie, and then they put in the stop signs, they don't get to then take that off the queue. They have to keep that in whatever it was. It was going to take 5 years. It's still going to take 5 years, but we get this in the interim, because I was worried about exactly that, of now you do something so you don't have to talk to people there anymore, and now you go on to something else. But I still think there's a second issue that this bill doesn't fully address, which is when there's a fundamental disagreement, when State Highway Administration's analysis of the area is that they don't need to do more, right? So that we were just, we had them in Takoma Park looking at Elm and Ethan Allen Avenue. And their analysis was that it didn't warrant a four-way stop sign. So in that case, this bill wouldn't change that analysis that leads to that. This does not do that. In some ways, I mean, I think that this bill is really big, and I have to tell you, it's going to take a lot of work to get it through. So I need all of you. But in some ways, this is just like take what, except for the initial kind of comprehensive analysis of the state, but parts 2, 3, 4, and 4 are about take the things that your current framework already says need to be done and do them, and here's the money for it. Right? Because I think so many of us are like, but you were here and you said you were going to do this, and it's been 5 years and nothing's happened. So I hate to sort of undersell what this does, because I think it would be big if they actually did all the things that they come out and say, yeah, this intersection needs X, Y, Z, and we'll put it on the list. But that does not get at this other piece that I do think we need to get at over time, which is, when they come out and do their analysis, and then say, no, it doesn't, this corridor shouldn't have a lower speed limit, or shouldn't have a, whatever it is. That is still something that we have to get at. And that gets back to what I said earlier, is like, this bill is not the panacea for everything that's wrong with State Highway Administration. So we do have to keep working. Even if we pass the bill, there's still going to be more work to do. But I think it's a step in the right direction. Big step, if we can get it passed. So I do hope that folks will advocate around it. Are there other questions? Did anything else come in the chat that I missed?
Yeah, we're approaching 8:30, which I believe is when Delegate Charkoudian needs to sign off.
Hop off in a second, yeah.
So if there's perhaps one more question, and then we can.
Lauren,
wrap up.
do you have a sponsor in the Senate yet? And what committees will the bill go to in the House and the Senate?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the cross file is Jeff Waldstreicher, and there's two places it could go. It could actually, so a lot of times state transportation bills go to JPR, which Judicial Proceedings Committee, and then they would go to Environment and Transportation. So that's kind of what I had been thinking we would have. Because there's a large amount of funding involved, some folks I've talked to recently have suggested that it may actually end up in Budget and Tax and Appropriations, or it may get a second assignment to Budget and Tax and Appropriations. So it would be E&T and Appropriations as a second, or vice versa. So we actually won't know. We don't have a bill number yet, and we'll know. Well, the way it works is I haven't pre-filed the bill. I'm sorry. I'm still sorry. This is one of the few bills I haven't pre-filed, partly because I'm still having these conversations with folks. I'm talking to SHA, talk to other statewide advocates. David or Christy, if you all want to get whatever the other list was that you thought I could maybe reference in the list of countermeasures that could be looked at, please send that to me in the next couple of days.
Sure.
So I'm finalizing it. I'll file it early in session, and then probably in a week into session, we'll have a bill number and we'll know which committees it's going to. And I can just make sure that ACT has the bill number in the committees as soon as I have it. And then you all can advocate around it as you know how to do.
How big of an issue is this in other jurisdictions? I mean, I'm assuming like, Baltimore, big urban areas have it. Is this going to also bring in support from more rural areas or?
Yeah, so Baltimore doesn't have, the roads in Baltimore are not state highway roads, so they don't have the State Highway Administration issues. I mean, they have issues, but with safety, but they're not state highway. So yeah, it's going to be a mix. I think, certainly Montgomery and Prince George it's really significant. I think Anne Arundel has places where it's significant. Someone from the Anne Arundel bike, so I can't remember what their bike advocacy group looked at this and was giving feedback. Howard County similarly has these issues and is given feedback on it. So say parts of Baltimore County, I think the much more rural parts, we probably would have less, legislators with less experience kind of directly kind of banging their heads against the wall around these issues. So I think it's going to be a mix of how much legislators who are voting on it have direct experience.
What about Frederick and Hagerstown? Are those state roads?
There are state, yeah. Every other place in the state, there are state roads. They just some have more than others going through them. But yeah, Frederick.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
Salisbury, right. So, the parts of the shore, I think Salisbury would be, potentially could get some advocacy, good advocacy there.
Okay, well, I want to give a big thank you to Delegate Charkoudian. She's really given us a lot of education and something to look forward to, and some specific and very useful bill that we can advocate around. And we look forward to monitoring the progress as next year progresses. So thank you very much for your efforts.
Thank you. And feel free to, if you have ideas specific to this bill, please do send them like in the next 48 hours, because I am trying to finalize it and file it, soon. So happy to take ideas, just I need them really soon. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you.